As my son's illness dragged on, my husband began to be absent from home more often. Even after our son passed away, he didn't shed a tear. Instead, he shouted, "You've been nothing but a nuisance to me until the end," and punched the coffin. I have no use for such a person. Trembling with anger, I held a letter from my late son in my hand. Now, let's begin the revenge my son left for me. My name is Olivia. I'm a 37-year-old housewife. I have a normal family with a husband, a son, and a daughter. But that normalcy changed when my son Ryan was 7. Ryan, who had just started school, suddenly collapsed at school one day. He suffered from unexplained headaches and vomiting. When we rushed him to the hospital, the test results brought despair to our family. He was given a year to live. That was the diagnosis. He had a rare and difficult disease with no cure and no hope of complete recovery. All we could do was give medication to alleviate the symptoms. We could ease the symptoms, but we couldn't stop the progression. Day by day, Ryan grew weaker and eventually became bedridden and unable to walk. By the time he was in 3rd grade, he could no longer go to school. That's when my husband, who should have been a kind and compassionate father, began to change. He started working overtime and then began staying out without notice. When he did come home, he lashed out at me and the kids. I started to think it was better when he didn't come home at all. The children were also frightened by their father's sudden change. I didn't want them to grow up always watching their parents' faces. So I felt relieved on the days he didn't come home. I don't know what he's doing outside. He was recently promoted, so I think he's genuinely busy. But that doesn't excuse him for not coming home, which makes me suspicious. Dad's not coming home again today? It seems so. My daughter Amy, eating dinner, also seemed lackluster. She's 8 years old, a time when she should be clinging to her parents, and I felt sorry for her. I was preoccupied with caring for Ryan and inevitably had less time to spend with Amy. I wished my husband would help. Then one day, after several days, my husband came home. As soon as he got home, he threw his belongings and clothes around carelessly. The atmosphere at home turned sour immediately. Unaware of his own impact, he slumped onto the sofa and arrogantly demanded, "Ah, I'm tired. Hey, bring me food. It's not ready yet, wait a little longer." What? You should have timed your meal preparations with my return. How long have you been my wife? I'm sorry, but Ryan wasn't feeling well today. Again. How much more does he plan to bother me? I couldn't stay silent after that. How can you say that? He's trying so hard. Despite feeling sick from the medication, he forces a smile so as not to worry us. So what? Do you think that makes me happy? If he wants to please me, he should get healthy. That's terrible. How can you say such cruel things? Don't you remember the day our son was born? You were so happy, holding our child in your arms, crying. Have you forgotten that day? I wanted to speak but couldn't, wanted to ask but couldn't. Afraid of the filthy and harsh words that would come from my husband's mouth, I just cried. Seeing this, he stood up and grabbed his coat. Enough. I can't stand this gloomy house. I'm going out to eat. Wait. Please wait. Ignoring my pleas, he left. The door closed harshly. The room fell silent. Mom. Dumbfounded, I heard a soft voice behind me. Turning around, I saw Amy standing there with a worried look. Trying to hide my tears, I rushed to her and hugged her with a smile. Dad just came back, but he's leaving again? Yes, that's right. He's busy. I see. She didn't express her loneliness, but I could feel her trembling little body. So, I hugged her even tighter. "It's okay, it's going to be okay." "Okay." Amy's small hand tightly gripped my clothes. My husband didn't come home that night. After watching Amy fall asleep, I went to Ryan's room. Dad was angry again, wasn't he? Ryan, who was alternating between hospital stays and home care, was at home today. I was relieved he didn't need to be hospitalized, but I knew my husband would have preferred him to be in the hospital. The kind, child-loving husband I once knew was gone. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault, Ryan. You've done nothing wrong." "But Dad is just a bit irritable because he's busy with work. He's working for our family." As I said this and stroked his head, my son, Ryan, squinted his eyes in comfort. It's painful to see tubes coming out from various parts of his body. Despite the pain and suffering, Ryan still smiles for us. He's a gentle son, always considering his parents, even though he's going through so much. I force myself to hold back tears and smile back at him. "You seem to be getting better. Do you think you can eat something?" Maybe a little. I'll bring you some soup and grated apple. Just wait here." "Okay." "Hey, Mom." As I was about to leave the room, my son called out to me. "Yes? I love you." His words caught me by surprise. I hurried out of the room to prevent my tears from overflowing. Ryan's condition was fluctuating, but the disease was steadily progressing, taking away his life. One day, after a long time, my husband returned home in a rather good mood. "Welcome back. Did something good happen?" "It's none of your business." He's in a good mood, but his attitude is still poor. "Where's Ryan? In the hospital again today?" "He's been home since yesterday." I had informed my husband about Ryan's hospitalization through a message. He saw it but didn't respond. It's been a long time since I heard him show concern for Ryan. He turned 10 3 days ago. "Oh, right. Did he?" "It's not a matter of right. He used to remember before Ryan fell ill. For years now, we've been having birthdays without my husband. He seems to have lost interest in both Ryan and our daughter Amy. Is there any point in being a family with such a person? I ask myself, but I still haven't found an answer. Despite everything, the children still look up to him as their father, so divorce isn't a simple decision." I was about to speak while he was still in a good mood. "Dad." My daughter entered the living room. "Oh, Amy. It's been a while. I'm happy to see you're doing well." I frowned at his sarcastic remark, unnoticed by my husband. Amy hesitated for a moment and then said, Brother wants to talk to you, Dad." "What?" Both my husband and I were surprised by her words. "Ryan? Want to talk to me?" To his question, Amy just nodded. "He said he wants to have a man-to-man talk." Usually, my grumpy husband would have said something like "that's a bother" and ignored it. But today, he's in a good mood. He reluctantly headed to Ryan's room. "That's good." I, too, sighed with relief and asked my daughter, "What did your brother want to talk about?" "I don't know. I just heard Dad come home and Ryan said he wanted to talk to him, for the last man-to-man talk." "What? The last talk? Did Ryan say that?" "Maybe he understands. He knows he doesn't have much time left. The doctors said he had a year to live when his illness was discovered. It's been 3 years, he's fought incredibly hard. But the end is probably near." I don't know what my husband and son talked about. My husband came out of Ryan's room in a bad mood and wouldn't tell me what they discussed. Ryan also kept it a secret, saying it was man-to-man talk. Their behavior left me feeling restless. Then, a month later, on the rare occasion when my husband said he was going on a business trip, not just staying out overnight. Ryan. Brother. Ryan's condition suddenly worsened, and shortly after arriving at the hospital, he passed away peacefully, as if comforting our grieving hearts. He looked serene, with no signs of suffering. My dear son, my first child, my big brother, Ryan. No matter how many times I called his name, his eyes would not open again. While hugging my sobbing daughter, I, too, cried. We both continued to cry out loud. But there was no time to grieve. I first contacted our parents and in-laws. Both sets of grandparents rushed over and cried when they saw Ryan. Then, leaving my exhausted daughter in my mother's care, I started making arrangements. Dealing with the hospital, organizing the funeral, it was dizzyingly busy, but that was okay. Being busy helped me forget the sadness. Worried parents and in-laws looked on, but I forced a smile and kept moving, assuring them that everything was okay. This was a first-time experience for me, and above all, I was mentally exhausted. If my father and father-in-law hadn't helped, I wouldn't have managed. And if my mother and mother-in-law hadn't taken care of the house and Amy, it would have been impossible. What the hell is he doing? It was my father-in-law who finally exploded in anger. He raised his voice over the absence of my husband, who should have been more active than even me, his wife. He's on a business trip. A business trip at a time like this. I'm calling him. With that, my father-in-law called my husband, his own son. I could hear them arguing over the phone. This meant my husband was undoubtedly in a foul mood. I had a bad feeling about this, and it turned out to be right. A few hours later, my husband appeared, enveloped in an unmistakably bad mood. I was in the middle of an important business trip. What will you do if this ruins the deal? To his angry outburst, my father-in-law retorted, "Who prioritizes work over their son's funeral? If that's the kind of heartless company you're dealing with, let them go under." At those words, my husband, who had no comeback, glared at Ryan's coffin. Always in my way, right to the very end. He even punched the coffin. Of course, my father-in-law pummeled him for it. At that moment, something inside me snapped. But now was not the time to show it. At least for now, I had to hold it in. My husband continued to grumble, but he quieted down once the funeral started. And then, unbelievably, Ryan, why did you leave me behind? He started crying. Had he finally come to realize his loss and feel sad? No, that wasn't it. I clearly saw him secretly using eye drops and pretending to cry. His eyes were dry, shedding no new tears. To those unaware, he might seem like a tragic father, deserving sympathy. I endured for now, but it was enough to solidify my resolve. And as the funeral neared its end, it was time to read the letter Ryan left behind. A letter? He left a letter? It's his last will. Amy told me it was in his locked desk. I had already read the letter, but my husband was surprised. What does it say? I'm about to read it. Saying so, I stood in front of the microphone, bowed, and began to read the letter. It was a tearjerker. His joyous life experiences. His gratitude. Words for his beloved friends. Thoughts for his grandparents. About his sister, Amy. And about me. Ryan's life shone brightly. He left us saying he was happy and thankful. I love you. The words I once heard from him were written there numerous times. No matter how many times I read it, I couldn't stop crying. Yet, I chose to read this letter myself. Sobs could be heard from the attendees. Amidst the crying, there was one who did not shed a tear, my husband. He made wiping gestures with a handkerchief, but his eyes were dry. Was he aware? Aware that despite all the thanks expressed to various people, there were no words for him, his father? It seemed the attendees noticed before he did. Olivia, aren't there any words for his father? She whispered to me, choked with tears. At that moment, my own tears stopped. Yes, they're coming up next. That's right, I couldn't cry. Because what was coming next was crucial. To Dad. I raised my face and read aloud. My husband's face lit up instantly. Was he seeing the image of his son in his clouded eyes? What does he think he's going to be told? What is he expecting? That he will be called a good father? There's no way that could be. To Dad. If you want to have an affair, please release Mom and Amy and leave. As I read, the room buzzed with whispers. But I didn't stop. Remember that day, when I talked alone with you, Dad, you were in a great mood. You told me happily that you got a cute, young lover. This is a secret just between us men, you said with a laugh, right? The murmuring in the room grew louder. Hey. What? He reached out in panic, but my father-in-law grabbed his hand just in time. With my father holding him in a tight grip, I continued to read. Her name was Cindy, right? You even showed me on your phone a photo of you entering a hotel. Mom, there's plenty of evidence of the affair in Dad's phone. Make sure to get it before it's deleted. The revelation stirred the crowd. I finished reading the letter, the decisive words of my son. What? My husband hurriedly reached for his phone in his pocket, but my father-in-law was quicker. He snatched the phone and began checking its contents. It's so clear. He said this with a disgusted look, coldly staring at my husband. Mom, I'm sorry. While you were busy taking care of me, Dad was having an affair. He neglected you, who was working hard, and only did as he pleased. I can't forgive Dad for that. Don't joke with me. Who do you think allowed you to live like this? My enraged husband was stopped by my father. Whose thanks to? It's thanks to me. I hired you because you were Olivia's husband. The money you earned isn't just for you to use, it's for the family, right? I didn't hire a son-in-law to let him cheat. Father, that's... Yes, my husband worked at my father's company. He was promoted smoothly, embarrassingly, because he was family. It would have been fine if he had worked diligently. But apparently, he hadn't. I was shocked by the internal investigation. You told Olivia and the others you were working overtime or on business trips, but you were actually leaving early every day without really working. The evidence of you meeting your affair partner is solid. Who do you think allowed you to live? It's thanks to Ryan, who bravely fought his illness with a smile, to Amy, who endured her loneliness, wishing for her brother's recovery and helping her mother, and to Olivia, who sacrificed herself for the family. What have you done? You've done nothing and dare to act superior. Ah. My husband turned pale and fell on his backside at my father's scolding. Relatives had gathered around him. The worst. Inhuman. Scum. Insults rained down on my husband, who now had tears in his eyes. As a final blow, I continued reading my son's letter. The dad I loved is nowhere to be found now. The person here now is a villain I hate. If you feel even a little guilty, villain, give Mom the money and leave the house. Mom, I really wanted to protect you. But it seems I won't be able to anymore. After I'm gone, please live freely with Amy. Divorce Dad. I paused for a moment, then raised my face. Please be happy. Mom and Amy's happiness is my happiness. Tears again rolled down my cheeks and wet the ground. The funeral hall was silent, with only the sound of crying. Amy, hugged by her grandmother, cried. Suddenly, she raised her tear-streaked face and shouted, "I hate you, Dad." At that moment, my husband completely broke down, crying, but no one sympathized. After the funeral, I divorced my husband. Thanks to Ryan, I found plenty of evidence of infidelity. My husband, having completely lost his fighting spirit, agreed to the divorce without much dispute. My father introduced me to a great lawyer, but it was hardly necessary. I was lonely. The family was only caring for the son, the wife. His pathetic excuses erased any remaining feelings I had for him. It was he who was lonely. Ryan and Amy must have been much lonelier. I wanted to scold him for not even being a parent, but I refrained, seeing it as a waste of effort. Later, my husband paid the alimony and child support in one lump sum. He didn't have the money himself, but my father-in-law apparently covered it. My in-laws apologized for their son's actions. I gratefully accepted the money but didn't hold any grudge against them. My ex-husband, an adult, was solely responsible for the affair. Everything was caused by my weak-hearted ex-husband. He was naturally fired from my father's company. Even after losing his job, my father-in-law declared he wouldn't wait for repayment and found my ex-husband a job. It seemed to be a harsh workplace, with no time for womanizing. I wondered if it was legally okay, but well, there must be various dark jobs in this world. I thought my ex-husband should suffer. My daughter and I started a new life. It was hard at times, but whenever I thought of Ryan, who bravely fought his illness, I encouraged myself. Then, 20 years later, a baby's cry echoed in the hospital. Holding the baby was my daughter, Amy, who had just become a mother. No matter what happens, I'll protect this child. My daughter, now a mother, had a determined look. I squinted my eyes at her growth and peered at the baby's face. The baby, somewhat resembling Ryan, reminded me of him. I didn't think of reincarnation. Still, I was happy that Ryan's blood was being passed on. "Mom, I love you." I felt as if I heard my son's voice and gently wiped